Hi, everybody. My name is Miles, and I'm with Peak Performers. Thank you so much for joining me today for yet another installment of Disability Inclusion Academy brought to you by Disability in Central Texas. I'm so excited to have you join the conversation with me today because what we're talking about is something that's very personal to many people with disabilities. Many people might get hurt on the job. They might incur a lifelong disability as a result of an accident or injury or ongoing chronic illness. And a lot of times they may struggle with support. A lot of times they struggle with disclosure. A lot of times they struggle to navigate that venture back into the workplace. And I get asked all the time, like, how can I better retain employees with disabilities within my workplace? And this is your answer to doing just that, to building a greater, more disability inclusive culture. So thank you for joining me. We're going to be running for about an hour total today. But before we get started, I'm going to actually turn it over to Aaron Bangor just to introduce the club and how you as a business can get involved with us. Aaron?
Thanks, Miles. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Aaron Bangor. I'm chair of Disability in Central Texas, which is the local affiliate of Disability In, which is a national and international organization dedicated to promoting disability inclusion in the workplace, as well as the marketplace in general. Disability inclusion is what we do, and we are really here to help businesses and organizations of any size, shape, or purpose better understand how to do that. What we find is organizations, they know they want to do that. They know it's the right thing. They know kind of intuitively it can help them better meet not only their bottom line, but really live the values that their organization has. But they don't know a lot of things. And then what we learned is nobody knows everything, right? But one thing you can do as an organization is reach out to folks that are trying to do the same thing, and together, somebody knows a little bit about this topic, somebody knows a little bit about that topic, and collectively, we are a whole lot smarter together. And that's what we want to do at Disability In, is get folks together in the Central Texas area to better have look for better outcomes for organizations as well as for people with disabilities in the workforce. And today we've got a topic that is not often talked about, but it happens so much. We just felt it was really important to bring it up and talk about, and that is the idea that how do we retain employees after an accident, an illness, or an injury, something that might cause them to not be able to do something about their job that they had beforehand. In a lot of cases, these are situations in which the employee was not a person with a disability ahead of time. Maybe they were, but in a lot of cases they weren't. And this is a strange new area to navigate, whether it's a temporary condition and they need to figure out can they stay at work just because they can't do maybe the job that in the same way they did before, or maybe they are out of work, and how do we make sure that they come back to work and as contributing as fully and productively as possible, so that we as employers are making sure that we're retaining our talent, not having to start over again and train up somebody new, and the costs and of doing that, but also make sure we're continuing to invest in people. So that is the purpose of today's conversation. And we've got a great panel set up for you to talk about some different aspects of this particular topic. And we're hoping at the end, if you're an employer and this is something that you've been thinking about, or maybe you have some experience in here, that you still learn something, or maybe it's something you haven't thought about, and as an employer, know that you need to up your game. Disability In is here, whether at the national level or specifically you're in Central Texas region, that we're here for you. But also as an employee, maybe this is a topic that you've never thought about, you never hope to think about, but at some point we know the data are what they are. There's about a 1 in 2 chance that you'll experience some sort of disabling condition during your work life, and you'll need to have to know that this is something that you can deal with head on, with working with your employer to make sure that you are continuing to work and contribute in the organization that you want to stay with. So with that, Miles, I'll turn it back over to you to introduce our panelists and get this session rolling.
And Aaron isn't going away. Don't worry. He's going to be back towards the end here. He's also going to be monitoring the chat. Speaking of which, take a second to introduce yourself. And we're going to actually show a couple of folks. Looks like Yvette just dropped in. So thanks for joining us. By the way, if you haven't yet followed Yvette, she is a fantastic disability inclusion influencer within our space. I strongly recommend that you give her a follow. But take a second to introduce yourself. Who are you? Which organization do you work for? And also ask your questions. Even if we don't get a chance to answer them live on camera here, we'll still take some time to point out some other additional resources for you. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and bring on the rest of our panelists. So the first one that we have Kendra Ragsdale. Kendra comes from a background of vocational rehabilitation, but Kendra, you say it so much better than me. Like, who is it that you are and what do you do?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kendra Ragsdale. So I have a master's in rehabilitation counseling, and I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And actually, I'm in a doctoral program right now focused on public administration with a focus in public policy. And a little bit about my background, I started working for the state of Texas as a vocational rehab counselor in what was called the Texas Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services, and I worked in the Division for the Blind. So I worked with people with all sorts of disabilities, but specifically people who had vision loss or total blindness, but then a lot of other disabilities played into there too. And then also I worked with Aaron actually at AT&T in the Accessibility and Compliance Department. And since 2016, I've worked with my company, The World of Work, where I do more private vocational rehab services like vocational evaluations, accommodation reviews, and then I also provide forensic vocational rehabilitation services.
And I think vocational rehabilitation is something that, it's whispered a lot within disability circles, but a lot of people don't fully understand what it is. I myself am a Voc Rehab customer. I go to Voc Rehab to get my hearing aids once every couple of years. And it has done wonders. Having access to hearing aids that would normally cost me thousands of dollars gives me access to those tools to be able to engage in the workplace in a meaningful way and comfortably and productively without having to do a great expense out of my pocket. So I appreciate it. But just for people that aren't as familiar, like how could employers get involved within VR and how do you assist with accommodations?
So for employers, there's several ways, but to start for employees or for people who are seeking some kind of workplace accommodation. So you can go to every state in the country has a vocational rehabilitation department. It's mandated by the government. And so if you're eligible for those services, if you have a disability that is a barrier to employment, then you can gain the services you need to either keep your job or to acquire a new job. And so I'll talk a little bit more about all of the services that are offered through VR. But for employers can also work with a vocational rehabilitation counselor. We can also kind of serve as a middleman because it can be hard for the person who's just acquired a disability and maybe is, still kind of coming to terms with it to then have to go and explain to the employer, these are all of my needs. So that's where the counselor can come in and help bridge that gap.
And the final thing that I'll say around VR is that many people may think that they're not eligible. It's always worth having a conversation, especially if you would benefit from these kinds of services. So reach out to Kendra, make sure that you connect with her. Kendra, thanks so much. We're going to turn it over to Jesse. Well, hi, Jesse. And you may notice that Jesse actually shares a very similar background to me. And that's actually because Jesse works for Peak Performers as well, kind of leading our employment practices analyst and particularly leading the accommodations. So Jesse, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I come from the HR background, but I joined Peak Performers earlier this year, and it's been really a great experience. I do work, as Miles said, as the employment practices analyst for Peak Performers. It's a role that is really specialized. I do participate a lot in the ADA accommodations. It does take a majority of my role. I assist our organization with multi-state employment compliance as well, and help navigate Peak Performers through the complex HR requirements. So really my role bridges a lot of the legal, HR, and operations, making sure that we are compliant and that all of our processes are practical so that we can continue supporting hiring people with disabilities.
Thank you, Jesse. It's good to see you. And real quick, Jesse, just in 30 seconds or less, would you mind just kind of clarifying for me, like, what is a temporary disability? Because I hear this a lot within this state, and this crosses over so much with the return to work kind of conversation. So what is a permanent versus what is a temporary disability, and how can we be more inclusive to really both?
Yeah, I like to think of those temporary disabilities as life's curveballs. We think about the broken leg, we think about concussions, or even after surgery. And so, really, just because we have a temporary disability doesn't mean that people want to stop contributing to their career. The key is going to be remembering that disabilities or short-term disabilities, sorry, um, are going to be something that employers can really set a tone to by being flexible, open to adjusting the duties, or even just having kind of different processes in place that don't make employees feel like they are a burden. Something that we could do to make sure that employees don't feel like they are a burden is going to be having phased return to work steps, or light duty assignments, and just to make it the difference for someone who is going to come back. Instead of feeling like they're being pushed out, they feel like they're actually going to be contributing to the organization. And really the goal is to keep people connected with their work, making sure that they feel like they're contributing to the organization.
I love that. And even if you yourself have never, if you don't have a disability yourself, I think that is so relatable. Like the experience of having a broken arm or having intensive surgery or something like that. And maybe that fear that you have about, like, am I going to be able to keep my job? And short answer is, like, employers, we need to be thinking about all the people that are coming to work and how we can support all of them. Thank you so much, Jesse, and it's good to see you. All right, and finally, we have Lee coming on. So Lee, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, but then I also am really, really curious, within the city of Austin, where you work, you have a very unique program around role restructuring and being able to redeploy workers, especially after they have newly acquired a disability. So Lee, introduce yourself and then tell us about this very unique and very interesting program within the city of Austin.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Wynn. I'm with the City of Austin HRD Corporate ADA Program Office. I've been with the city about 20 years, and in those various roles, I've done everything from assisting employees, as well as managing something called the co-staff liaison for our mayor's committee for people with disabilities. We put on NDEAM events. You might have heard of them: White Cane Day, with the Texas Workforce Commission, Chris Cole, and with Nicole Behringer. We've also done a lot in terms of just recognizing our employees with disabilities, and also employers that hire people with disabilities. I've been in this role about 20 years. Subject matter expertise in consulting on reasonable accommodations for our 45 departments and offices here at the City of Austin in terms of reasonable accommodations. Here at the City of Austin, we run a very unique program. It's called the ADA Reassignment Program. As you know, as you may or may not know, under reasonable accommodations, there is an obligation for employers to reassign employees that can otherwise are unable to do the essential functions of their job. And in this program, we're able to provide some very unique job placement assistance programming for folks to find maybe a vacant position that they can otherwise go into in our reassignment program in any of the available vacancies that we have here at the City of Austin. That includes maybe some on-the-job structuring, some maybe retraining, getting a resume refresh. We offer a variety of programs to allow an employee that can otherwise go into another position where they can do the essential functions of that job. Thank you.
I love it. Yeah. And I mean, I granted it, City of Austin is a huge organization with 15,000 employees, but I hope that other employers who might be smaller, or even the large employers joining us, take away something from Lee or connect with him just around ideas on how they can better redeploy workers, as opposed to just saying, no, you can't do your job anymore. Like, how can we think about that a little bit differently? Lee, I am so glad to have you on the panel. And real quick, we're just going to kind of check in on the feed. It looks like we have a couple folks joining us. And we do have a couple questions that are coming in. Opal, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you. And please take a second to introduce yourself if you are joining us live here. Love to connect to you personally, and we'd love to connect you to each other. Let's make this a community as well. And having said all that, let's go ahead and bring on the full Brady Bunch panel right here. Now we're all together. We've been here the whole time, but now we can see each other face to face. And I want to jump right into the content of the day. So this first question is for you, Jesse. So when preparing this webinar, I actually realized that I made a bit of a faux pas. I said retaining employees after an accident or illness, but what I failed to mention was, I said, in retaining employees after an accident or injury, but I failed to say illness, and this doesn't really capture the full experience. For example, somebody might have been battling cancer for a while too. So my first question is, how can managers be more equitable in how they handle both the visible and the invisible disabilities that people may encounter, and just really kind of handle all those individuals in a way that is inclusive?
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen about invisible conditions can sometimes be dismissed because there's no, for example, a cast or a visible injury that you'll see on a person. And the impact on that person is going to be very, very real for an invisible injury. When someone is going through, for example, a mental health crisis, or something more dramatic, maybe like a chemotherapy, the fatigue and stress can really just be as disabling as a physical injury. And the most equitable approach is going to be to respond with the consistency across the board. So ensuring that if you ask yourself, if a person came in with a sling on their arm, how would you respond? And then apply that same mindset to something that you cannot see. So a culture of trust really helps as well. When employees know that they can be met with the understanding instead of like skepticism, they are more likely to come forward and early to help with everyone managing the expectations there. I like to look back at early in my career where we have situations where a member would come back from planned surgery and we hadn't really planned on what the return to work may look like. And so the employees' first days really just are not as productive at work, and we're scrambling to make these adjustments. And this could leave your team members feeling really like they're more of a problem, and it will ruin other people's days as well. So making sure that we have that culture of understanding, encouragement, and that we're also just treating everybody the same, regardless of whether it's a visible or invisible disability.
It's so easy to miss it if you can't see it, right? But that doesn't make it any less valid. Lee and Kendra, anything that you'd like to add to that?
I think we always, want to look at it from a holistic well-being perspective. When an employee wants to be able to return to work and be productive, we want to ask them, is there anything we can do to help you to reintegrate back into the workforce? And we always want to do it with empathy and understanding. I think those are very important aspects. Over my 20 years, I've seen hundreds, maybe even thousands of cases where the best outcome was that as an employer, we were trying to get this person to, come back to work in a friendly manner, empathetic manner. Oftentimes with disability, there's this stigma that you're coming back and, there may be some just persuasion that needs to happen. And really, we want to take an empathetic and overall very holistic approach to helping employee come back. And we do that every day here at the City of Austin. Thank you.
I love that. So Kendra, this next question is for you. So we're a panel of experts. We've been in HR, we've been in voc rehab, we've been in accommodation space for a long time, but I would argue that most people kind of don't really have a clue about this. Like they don't know a lot about this. So I guess, and I think that that's where a lot of things go sideways too, where people might read stuff online, they might be talking with their friends, they may be having some conversations. So what do you wish employees and employers knew about FMLA and ADA processes that would yield better results? And by the way, before I get this comment, if you wouldn't mind explaining the acronyms FMLA and ADA for everybody that might be joining us that isn't as familiar.
Okay, so these two might know FMLA's acronym a little better, but it's Family Medical Leave Act. Is that right? And then the ADA's Americans with Disabilities Act. So what I usually pertain to is more the disability space and not the FMLA space. So I'd love for you guys to chime in about that. For ADA, though, what in particular for employers and employees to know is that the ADA covers people with employers have to make reasonable accommodations for a person at their workplace. But reasonable accommodations is kind of a tricky word. It really means that it can't be an undue burden on the employer. Now, these organizations that we've heard about are fantastic, and especially City of Austin, you just see all of the resources available for someone with a disability. Probably the person knows exactly who to go to in HR, but there are so many small companies. The majority of companies are going to be small businesses who don't necessarily have the funds to be able to provide accommodations that could be costly. So that's where it's important to know about vocational rehabilitation, because we can assist in that matter. So accommodations could range from, a stand-up, sit-down desk for somebody, but it could also be hearing aids like you talked about, Miles, or it could be a screen reader for someone who is losing their vision. Now that in particular, I used to work with about 14 years ago, and those software programs were thousands of dollars that would have to be, a new software every year or two. Now they're built into computers and phones. So it's a relatively, zero cost to the business or the individual, but really knowing your rights as the individual, but then understanding what accommodations you need as the person who is coming into the workplace. And so that's what I would work with someone to see: what kind of accommodations would you need? What does your workplace look like? And then how do you communicate that to your manager? Because that can be a difficult conversation to have. And it could take some prep and some guidance on how to bring that up and to already come in with the plan. I think many employers, especially if they're new to the disability space, might feel quite off guard and worried about, okay, how much is this going to cost me? How much time is this person going to have off? If you can come in as the employee with a plan, this is what my needs are, this is what my plan is, these are the accommodations that I'm going to need. It can really foster a lot of communication. It can kind of bridge those gaps where those issues could arise.
I so often like to tell people that don't come to your employer with a problem, come with a solution. And
it works in every context.
Yeah, and to be fair, I feel like that puts a bit of an onus on the person with a disability. Yes, you have to be able to come up with this, but if you are able to take those steps of thinking ahead to exactly what it is that you need to be successful, or partnering with external folks that can help advise you, can be Voc Rehab. It can just be doing your own research. One of the places I like to start is askjan.org. It's federally funded. You'll see everybody nodding their head because they're very well aware of it. But let's say, for example, you have ADHD and you've heard that other people within the organization may get accommodations, but you don't know what those look like. Do your research, do some ahead of time. The final thing that I'll point out too is that while accommodations can be costly for many employers, many times they're not too, and many times they're very slight adaptations, and many times the cost is falling. And so we may have these preconceived notions about what it costs, but those things are coming down actually.
And many times the accommodations benefit the entire company, not just the individual too.
I mean, I myself use closed captioning on many of the video calls due to my hearing impaired, and it allows me to be able to access the content a little bit better. But you also have many employees that are hard of hearing, but they just haven't told you yet, and they are benefiting from having these accommodations easily accessible. All it takes is you flipping a switch to make sure that that kind of technology is available. Lee and Jesse, anything that you'd add?
Yeah, I would like to add, FMLA typically is going to be more used for when you are not able to do the functions of work. So you're taking some time away from work and focusing on either your health or maybe that of a closer family member. And the ADA is really focused on you returning to work with those accommodations. And so those are the main distinctions that I like to make. They're not the only distinctions, of course, but for sure, that's for the purpose of our conversation, that is what I wanted to add.
Awesome. Well, Lee, this next question is for you. So when an injury first happens, a lot of times our instinct as employees is to just soldier on. Like, you're just going to try to be tough. You're going to try to do the best that you can with it. but that leads to problems, right? Like first people end up exhausting all of their PTO, then they might be performance problems as they're in one day, out another day, and then they take FMLA after they finally discover about it and finally realize that they need that support. And then after they finally come back after an extended absence, the damage may be already done. Like they are viewed as less productive, less trustworthy, less whatever within the workforce. And this is really unfortunate. Like I oftentimes see this spiral happening with people with disabilities, especially newly acquired disabilities, where they're not in good communication. So I guess like as managers, if we notice that there's an issue early on, can we say something? Should we say something? And is there any other ways that we can get ahead of this vicious cycle, this vicious feedback loop?
And thank you, Miles, for that such a great question. I think the biggest part is being empathetic and looking at the holistic well-being of employees. It's very important for us, right? Where we want to talk about job performance, we want to talk about essential functions, but there's actually a better approach to that. You can ask them, is there anything we can do to assist you to be your whole self? I mean, anything at all. We really care about you. We want you to come back. And if there's anything here that we can do, we're happy to do that. Here at the City of Austin, that kind of just segues us into the various plethora of benefits we offer to our full-time and part-time employees. I know that there may be smaller employers and bigger employers with their own structure, policies, and ways of doing things. But I think the biggest and most important thing that you can do is have empathy and also look at the holistic well-being of the person, because you're trying to bring them back into the workforce in a productive manner and in a way that they themselves feel included in that conversation. And I think that's the best way to start those conversations, where you may be able to get some disclosure. And if you do, then look at your resources that you have for employers. The Southwest ADA Center through ILRU through Houston. You also have the ADA main hotline. But really, more importantly, what you kind of stress, Miles, is that all important jobs accommodation network, JAN. That is such a important aspect and an important resource for employers to understand their employees and what kind of disabilities they may present with, and how best to approach those questions and also approach the big thing, solutions to helping them come back to work.
Absolutely. Kendra or Jesse, anything that you'd add for being able to capture this empathy and get ahead of the problems before they even present as a problem?
I can, sure, absolutely. Sorry, I was letting Kendra go if she wanted to. I agree with Lee. Really, to start the conversation is going to be a manager's best tool. Say something along the lines of, I noticed that you've been pushing through. How can I support you? I really do believe those open-ended questions and asking how or what can I do versus like let me know if I can support you, or let me know if there's anything you need. That is going to not leave the door as open for conversation. So yeah, just making sure we ask those open-ended questions and reaffirming that we're there to support. That also really does bring down a lot of the recovery time. If you ask somebody pretty early on, for example, you have an employee who is walking around and you see that they are walking with a limp, or just not walking as they normally would, and you ask them, what can I do to support you? To see that you're still pushing through and I want to help you. If they do admit to any kind of medical needs and maybe there's an accommodation that's a temporary accommodation, you could assist them with their recovery time and get them back to their full-time work versus them potentially soldiering through, hurting themselves even further and taking more time away from work.
I think what I'm hearing is that ultimately the employee is in the driver's seat, right? Like it's up to them to disclose. But what we can do is we can keep an open ear and we can build a better culture where people feel more comfortable coming forward. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Jesse. And Jesse, actually, this next one I'm going to have you take the lead on. When an injury happens, it's paramount that employees communicate with their managers to keep them in the loop. However, they may feel fearful or ashamed of the injury that they just acquired, or it may carry a is stigma, such as somebody that has a mental health disorder and has some kind of mental health crisis. So what can we do to make them feel more comfortable coming to us for help?
Yeah, very much piggybacking off of what I had just mentioned is the best thing the manager can do is to set the tone before injuries even happen, though. And so the way I would think about that is to, build trust early by showing your employees that you listen to them and that you thank them when they raise concerns, especially when they follow through with promises and all that fun stuff. It could be as simple as saying, I would rather know better, I would rather know sooner than later, and that is better for us. You don't have to push through all the time, and just let employees know that you're waiting for them to kind of bring this up and that you're open and receptive to it. I would always imagine an employee who is, for example, diagnosed with cancer, and in one place they are pulled aside quietly and asked, hey, maybe it's best if you don't tell the team. And this person keeps working through, but every day they just feel a little bit more maybe isolated or that they have to carry this huge weight alone. And that really just will eat at their performance and their performance will slip. And if you have a different employee or that same employee, but they're working at a different organization and their manager says, hey, feel free to talk about this. You don't shame that conversation away from them to where they don't feel like they can't talk about it. That person might be more receptive to say something along the lines of this recovery is being really difficult, or this last treatment was really difficult for me. And that opens the conversation up for everybody to kind of be able to pitch in and to assist where they're needed. The big difference is that fear is going to that silence is really going to make fear in that person or make them fear their work and that they're going to be judged or that they're going to lose their job. And so just setting that tone before is really going to be helpful for people.
And Kendra, I am curious to hear from you on this, particularly because you oftentimes are, maybe as a voc rehab, you're kind of on the outside looking in. So how, based off of working with so many job seekers, what would you like employers to say or do in such a way that kind of signals that?
I really liked how Jesse put about setting the tone before something occurs, even if it's part of an onboarding process, beginning of training, new employee orientation. This is what happens if this occurs. If you do acquire a disability, these are the programs we have in place. These are the HR policies, which maybe are in a manual somewhere, but it means a lot more when it's the employer actually having a conversation with the person and not just thinking it's written down on paper. So being really open about that, because before it occurs is a really great place to start. Because just as Aaron mentioned, there's so many disabilities that we acquire through our lifetimes that could be temporary or not. It is very likely that something is going to happen. So might as well be quite upfront about it to ease everyone's concerns.
I love that. And we're going to take a second. I'm going to shout out the audience that are here with us. Take a second to drop in the chat maybe ways that you wish employers would express something a little bit differently. Or if you're on the employer side, what are you proactively doing right now to make sure that your employees feel more comfortable coming to you when there is a problem so that you can get ahead of these kinds of things? And this next question for you, Lee, I did want to ask, so when somebody misses a lot of work, there's often feelings of resentment from the other people that now have to take over their role in addition to the job that they already have. So as manager, you may also struggle with covering shifts, and there's a lot of just sourness that happens as a result of this. So how should we think about structuring teams in the first place so that we can better handle when teammates do need to be away to look after their health?
And that's an excellent question, Miles. I think, first and foremost, you have to look at the way your team is structured business and operationally, right? But we always look at that whenever we're consulting or advising on these type of situations for our many departments and offices, which do various workloads. But at the same time, the work that is done, that can be parted out. That can be done in a way where maybe this person may be at home doing this one particular essential task or functions, but that essential function actually produces for the business or operational unit that they're in a way that they are an equal contributor, right? The big idea here is that can we come to a solution where you're equally contributing just like everyone else? And we find that those type of solutions have been very good for us because it just makes everyone feel comfortable that as a team member, there's an equal contribution, whether or not they're away or they're absent, but they're still being able to do what they're able to do in the manner that the team can still be effective. I believe that, the best solution are always ones that are individually catered, towards these individual teams where they're either taking on extra work, or if that's the case, they need to, know that everyone is contributing and that there's equity in the way that we approach that. I think that's the best way to make that approach so that there's not resentment and there's, you're not fomenting any kind of just individual dissatisfaction within your work group. It's a holistic approach to equitable solutions that also work for you. And you always have to take that team approach whenever you have team members that may be absent or otherwise are performing other areas of the essential functions for the business or work group. And it has to be clear and transparent. And I feel when there's clear transparency to that and some empathy, those are always equitable solutions for your work groups and team members.
It's such a tricky subject. Like, it's so tricky, especially when you get these personal emotions, when people feel like, oh gosh, I have to take on all this extra work. But I think the thing that I would tell anybody that maybe has a colleague and maybe can see themselves in this situation, take a step back from judgment, right? Like, take a step back from just assuming that this person is lazy, assuming that this person doesn't want to work. A lot of times there are things that are going on, and most of the time you're not going to be able to know what it is. They might tell you, but a lot of times they won't tell you. And you just have to trust that they're taking time away for good reasons. Jesse or Kendra, anything that you'd like to add there?
I would just add, so what Lee's program sounds wonderful. What that also could entail is you can have a vocational rehab counselor assign a job coach or a job accommodation specialist to a workplace, which would have some you'd have to navigate that with the employer to make sure the employer is okay with that. But it's just a way to understand what tasks are being performed, maybe by the unit, maybe it's a group of 10 people, what tasks are being performed, what task can the person with the disability perform, and then how those can be accommodated within the group. So there are other resources out there if you're not able to do that as a company yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to turn that question right back around on you, Kendra, because the next question is for you. Sometimes a person who has undergone a traumatic injury or is living with a new disability may think that they are unable to do the work as they were before. While this can sometimes be the case, it's a tragedy when people talk themselves out of their own job. So I guess my question is, how can we bolster our employees' confidence? And as employers, do we have any role to play in encouraging employees not to quit?
So the main takeaway is that even if you acquire a disability, temporary or permanent, your work life is not over. It's definitely part of my passion to help people with disabilities be able to do the work they want to do. Now, it might look different. It could be that you're accommodated in your job. It could be that you're looking at retraining for a new job. But if you're talking about maintaining your job, wanting your employee to stay with that job, a lot of it is fostering an environment of inclusion, equity, showing that there are programs available to everybody. Maybe there's mental health programs, there's other types of programs that fosters that inclusion so that people know that they're not alone. And then also knowing about these resources, knowing about, here are some things that I know about to help someone who maybe is going through a disability, and that would be if the employer or employee is coming to you asking you for help, but understanding what resources are available to your employees, and then being accommodating to that yourself, understanding that maybe it will take a little bit more time on your part, maybe as the employer, but knowing that in the long run, it's going to benefit your company.
I love that. Lee, have you ever experienced this phenomenon where people talk themselves out of their own job just because they're not giving themselves enough patience for figuring out what their new world of work looks like?
We've seen, those sorts of situations. And again, the ADA interactive process. It is an interactive process where both employers and also the employee will need to participate in order for us to come to equitable solutions. But we've always emphasized, and we want to work with employees holistically to get them to where they're able to perform the essential functions. I think the other big thing here is training and education, right? If you're able to offer disability sensitivity or etiquette training, I do that for our departments and offices here on demand, where we talk through the disabilities, we talk through solutions, we look at the resources so that maybe it's someone in the audience who's never disclosed or never thought they could understand that there's empathy and there's also ways that and solutions that we can come about to continue to retain you as an employee and also be productive for your work group. Maybe there's some animosity among team members that don't understand that there's a disability involved. Bring in that disability etiquette, sensitivity, and training that may foster a better relationship when people begin to understand. I also often do this exercise. It's called a STAR exercise to show invisible cognitive or developmental disability. And this comes down to what an accommodation is. I tell them to draw a star, right? And what I don't tell them is that they can move the paper to draw that star using a mirror. So it's actually designed to see, what side of your brain works. But the big idea here is that when you're able to restructure something, such as drawing a star by moving the paper, it shows that there's different ways to come about the same outcome, which is a productive employee. And I believe that disability etiquette sensitivity training is a big one, and also resource awareness will really help to foster better relationships in the workforce for people with disabilities, and also bring about that level of empathy for understanding. Thank you.
And you need to be having these conversations well ahead of when there's a problem. Like, that's the bottom line here, is that have these conversations ahead of time. Disability inclusion training, etiquette training, talking about this within your workplace, talking about being inclusive of your coworkers. These are the kinds of things that if you build a strong culture now, then it'll be less of a sore thumb later on down the road. This next question is for you, Jesse. In HR, your hands may be tied in being able to adequately explain why somebody's been gone or how they might be different when they finally come back. So after all, you cannot out their disability. This mystery can fuel a culture of repression where everybody feels afraid to talk about their health. So my question for you is, as employers, how can we facilitate a culture of understanding and acceptance for when they return, while also still respecting their privacy?
Yeah, a lot of times that culture and privacy portions are at odds, and they really don't have to be. We should start that type of support. I would imagine like a good manager would say something like, hey, we're just glad to have them back, and let's all be patient as they get settled. And that's really enough to tell your team. What matters in the workplace is really talking about health and the well-being in normal ways through wellness check-ins, and encouraging the use of your EAP, or even leadership sharing their own experiences with disabilities or with accidents. And keeping that type of conversation open and available to talk, and people feel confident, really just helps people with the culture and the mysterious events of like this. People are talking and whispering and like not having to have that culture diminished, and also not violating somebody's privacy. So I do like to think about, some members, maybe, for example, somebody who's been out of town or out of work, for a few months, and the manager knows that they can't say anything, right? So instead of avoiding it, the manager just gathers everybody and says, hey, we're excited to welcome this person back. Let's give them some patience. They are going to ease into their job again. And, just have that kind of culture and make sure that everybody is aware of all of the different support systems that you do have in place.
So we gather everybody together. We say, hey, Jesse's coming back into the workplace. We'd like to welcome back and extend a little bit of patience. And that looks significantly different than me going to work at 8 a.m. on a Monday, and then all of a sudden Jesse's there after being gone for several weeks. Yeah, that looks pretty different to me. Kendra and Lee, anything that you'd add to that?
I think that's a great program, but I also would say that, as things progress, then you just treat people as normal and don't bring too much to it. People are going to adapt to their environment, and then they will just be able to do their work life. And so bringing it up over and over again, especially in a group setting, could be uncomfortable for everybody, could be uncomfortable for the person. So addressing it is a wonderful thing, but then kind of let it be unless the person needs it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because not everybody's as comfortable talking about their disability as I am. Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of, I want to talk a little bit more about the value that this has. And this is something that I hope each of you will chime in on here. Retention is hard, but also incredibly valuable. So could you speak to the economic value in retaining employees after they come back from an accident or injury? And Kendra, would you start this off, please?
Yes. So not having those turnover costs are definitely going to be helpful for the employer. You're not having to retrain somebody. And if you're concerned about maybe accommodation costs, they're going to be much lower and could be provided by a state organization rather than having to retrain an individual. And mostly it really fosters a great environment to show that you have inclusive organization. You're going to have more loyalty from your people. You're probably going to retain other people as well because they'll realize that they're in an environment where they are supported. And it also could attract additional people to come to your organization because they'll feel comfortable and confident that they're taken care of.
I love that. Lee.
Here at the city of Austin, we service over 14,000 full-time employees, and we believe in the holistic well-being of our workforce. We also believe in institutional knowledge retainment. A lot of employees have a lot of knowledge and ability and skills that they obtain here, and we are very sorry to see them leave, and we will do everything we can, including looking at all of our benefits and programs that we offer here to retain an employee. And we want that to be a cultural awareness for all of our employees here in the organization. So that's why we always preach that, and we always practice it. And there has to be transparency. There has to be, neutrality, so that employees know that they can knock on doors, they can come through our HRD corporate ADA program office and be heard. And I think that's probably one of the most important aspects is an employee with disability. They know the stigmas, but they want to find empathy and they want to be heard. And we here at the city of Austin, we like to foster that through our programs, services, and benefits for all of our employees. And it's important, right, for employers, meaning that here at the city, I advise and consult with various departments and offices in various workplaces and organizational industries, that they understand that accommodations are not the cost that they think it is. Yes, screen reading technology, JAWS, might be now $1,000 for an enterprise license. I can get sign language interpreting through communication by hands or various agencies for $50 because we have a contract. They just have to have awareness of the knowledge and resources that we have and of our, working relationships with agencies and partners that we can use to effectively come up with solutions for them as an employer, so that they don't see it from, the cost perspective, but the perspective of holistically being able to retain our employees.
So I'm hearing a lot. It builds a better culture. You retain knowledge within your organization. I've also heard too that the average cost per single recruitment is about $2,500 for each employee. Jesse, is that kind of more or less kind of like some of the numbers that you've heard, like just from a dollars and cents perspective of hiring somebody new?
That is maybe just the recruiting portion, right? We have to think about the training and the implementation and all of that fun stuff. I mean, it really is exacerbated, yeah. And not only that, I mean, I would like to just kind of add on, because Lee and Kendra did a really great job of talking about all the positives, and also from an employee's perspective, right? From an employer's perspective in retaining your employees, not only do you want to have that loyalty and reduce the turnover within your employers, but if within your employment teams, but I would like to also mention that if you don't try to retain your employees, for example, through terminations, you will also be exposing yourself to some legal exposure.
That is a wake up call for some folks, but I think that that's a necessary wake up call too. We did have a great question in the chat too, that regarding the pros and cons of the return to work program. And Kendra, I imagine this is probably something that you might be a little bit more familiar with than our guest here. So return to work, by the way, is generally a program for somebody that might have been out of work for a while, possibly receiving SSDI benefits, but then is now looking to transition back into the workplace. So Kendra, would you mind talking a little bit more about Ticket to Work? We just got this question from the chat.
So I'm so glad to hear about it. It's something that I hope that every person who is on Social Security disability is aware of this program, which I think a lot of people are not, because that is a big thing that I talk about with people who come in and have a disability. They're very worried about losing their insurance, which is a completely understandable thing to be concerned about. And so the Ticket to Work program allows a person to continue receiving their SSDI while also being able to work for a certain amount of time. I think it's a year, if I'm remembering those thresholds, for a certain amount of money, a certain amount of time, so that they can get back into the workplace, feel more at ease, feel comfortable that they're not going to, many people are worried that they're going to get fired or they're not going to be able to continue doing the job based on their disability. And so it's a way to ease back into the workforce if someone hasn't been working for a while continuing to receive your SSDI benefits. So it's something I wish that everyone could shout from the rooftops about, because it's a great way to ease in. And during that time too, you would also be working with a vocational rehab counselor, someone like myself, to see what kind of job accommodations that you would need, see what kind of, if you need job coaching services, so you can get those services while also earning an income, and then hopefully being able to keep that job and then be on that insurance of that job.
I love that. Yeah, if you are ready to work, we want to see you back in the workplace. And there are tools and programs that are available for you to be able to do that. But also, I think most people would agree that the benefits offered from SSDI can be supplemental income, but it's difficult to really make a good living off of that. And so really, a lot of times it can be scary to leave those benefits behind. But for many of us, I hope that it would be the end goal, is to transition back into the workforce once you are feeling physically and mentally ready to do so. So finally, I want to kind of end on a positive note right here. So could each of you please share a story of success where an employee had to take time away to look after their health, but then came back? How did their role look different, and what did you do to make them feel welcome? Lee, would you mind starting this off?
So, I've assisted many employees over the year through our ADA reassignment program, everything from physical labor work to high skill cognitive work. We had an employee that, for on the job injury or illness, could no longer get onto his trash truck out there at our Kenneth Gardner Center out there in South Austin. For 15 years, he was used to jumping on that truck and running his route. When we knew that he didn't have the physical capacity to do that anymore, we introduced him and he accepted our ADA reassignment program. Often when we're hired, right, we're going to do a job, we're going to do it for a long time and hopefully for our lifetime. But also in that time, we also gain skills. We also have skills that we bring in from other work that's not related to the job that we have. And with that, you can restructure that. You can have, on the job training. You can have resume writing. We have a complete a program here that helped him to get to a point where he could pass the minimum skills assessment tests to qualify for our sedentary sit-down jobs. So he went from jumping off a trash truck for 15 years, for the next 10 years being able to type and being a admin assistant for one of our work groups here. Oftentimes that means there has to be a vacancy. You can't create one, but if there is, and then you can help an employee to be conducive, to know that he has a holistic way of support through our programs, we can get someone from doing physical labor into an office job. It just has to come with the willingness of the employer and the employee to work together for that kind of solutions, and with the understanding and knowledge of the programs that we offer to get them there. it was
I love
probably
that.
one of the best sort of cases I've seen through my 19 years working here with the city.
And that's something that we see all the time too, where people do have to do a career transition. Here at Peak Performers, we see many people that are injured. They're no longer able to work in a warehouse like they did for the last 20 years. They've hurt their back. And a lot of times it just comes down to you giving them a chance. Like, human beings are more than a sheet of paper, and you need to treat them as such. Like, you need to look at them, think creatively, and trust them when they say that I can do this thing, and trust them and extend that trust out and give them a shot. Many employers that I run into, they make the assumption that a person not only can't do something, but that there's no way that they can, or that they're not willing to take a risk, or that they don't want to risk having to fire them later on. But what's the greater sin here? Like, the greater sin in my mind is never giving that person an opportunity in the first place. Sorry, I got a little emotional there. I get worked up on this one. Jesse, over to you. Any particular stories you wanted to share?
Yeah, I had mentioned how earlier in my career we had made a mistake where we weren't, we had not prepared of how an employee could return back into the workforce, and they caught us off guard. And so I really took that to heart. And every time after that, when we had somebody who was returning back to work, we had a sit-down conversation, and we really focused on what they could do, and to keep that retention, or to keep that employee's perspective in the positive side, right? And so we would always focus on, like, what is it that you can do first? Let's focus on those things, and then we'll introduce additional responsibilities back into your workload as you're able to take them on if you can, right? And also encouraging employees through constructive and positive feedback has been really beneficial. Sometimes people just feel like they're not contributing as much as they used to, or at the same quality or level that they used to. And so that constructive and positive feedback is going to help them readjust, realign, and also make them feel positive, happy about their work.
I love it. Kendra, bring us home.
So one that sticks out to me, there was a gentleman who came in and he had acquired a brain injury from a bike accident. And from that brain injury, he had memory impairment, but then he also had visual field impairment also. And he was having to live with his parents again because of it. And the parents obviously were quite concerned, and he was so excited and so full of life and wanting to go to work. And he lived kind of in a rural part of outside of Houston. So what we found is he really liked gardening. And so we found a gardening center close to his home. We worked with the employer there, and then we were able to set him up with a job coach also to make sure he understood his tasks. He had a visual representation, and then he was reminded through the day too of what his tasks were. And it took some time on the employer's part, but he was so engaging with the customers, it was a really beautiful relationship what was established. And a lot of that was because he was so excited and willing, and it also showed the parents that he could still have quite a bit of independence, even though it was a huge life change for all of them.
Traumatic brain injury is such a challenging disability to live and work with. Like, you are perceived so much differently within the workforce. You yourself may have significantly more barriers than you did before, but a lot of times there is a job for every person. Like, there is many, a lot of times it takes that creativity, that flexibility, and I would say to each individual with a disability, it takes some patience with yourself to understand what is it that I can do now, given the circumstances that have been presented to me. And I would hope that anybody that is going through a traumatic moment right now that's watching this takes that to heart and thinks to themselves, I still have value. I still have value. I still belong, but maybe it just looks a little bit different than it did before. I want to thank each of our panelists for jumping on. We're going to bring Aaron on to close us out right here. But thank you, Lee. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Kendra. It's been such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
All right, Aaron, how'd we do?
That was awesome, Miles. I'll echo a couple things there. One is thank you to Kendra and Lee and Jesse for sharing their experiences and insights and their expertise about this topic. We kind of led this off by talking about this as something that is not an experience that employers always have. It might not be an experience that the employee has ever had before. We talked about acquiring a disability either temporary or permanent, can be, that's a big challenge for a lot of folks, and they may have that perspective that, well, I have this disability, I can't do something anymore, rather than thinking about how can I still contribute? Can I contribute in the same role, but maybe doing it a different way or with an accommodation? And accommodations may be something they haven't talked about before or heard of before. They don't understand what the interactive process is. These are some terms we talked about in the chat that I think are really important for both sides to know about and embrace in that process. And we, Miles, want to echo what you said there at the end, which is that this is about finding ways to keep talent doing work that they find valuable to their own self-esteem, to their own economic benefit, but also to the employer. I thought the panelists did an excellent job of framing up. This is not just just a one-sided thing. It's really only benefits the employee, it benefits the employer as well. Not only just making sure that they're treating their folks well, and how that reflects not only on for that one employee, but the other employees are definitely noticing how that happened, what's going on there, and how that employee is being treated, and go like, oh, maybe this is an organization I do want to stay with because they take care of folks, and that it is a two-way street. But also, obviously, the bottom line impact to business of making sure you're keeping somebody in that's knows the job, knows the business, knows how to support delivering whatever that organization's mission is of serving their customers or clients or so forth. So
wonderful.
Brilliant discussion. Thank you for leading it. As always, Miles, these disability policy academies are things that Disability in Central Texas puts on every month or two to have a discussion out here on LinkedIn about things that employers and employees can be doing to make sure that disability inclusion in the workplace is happening, that it is a two-way street. It is mutually beneficial. This is not about just either just the employer or just the employee, that there is a joint way to do this, that everybody comes out ahead. So appreciate everybody who joins these on a recurring basis. And hopefully you learned something. Hopefully in the comments, if you were just lurking around, hopefully you learned something. If you were there and contributed to the conversation, thank you as well. That's the goal of doing these. So with that, Miles, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Well, thanks everybody for staying with us. I know we ran a little bit over time, but such a valuable conversation. Thanks again to each of our panelists, and thanks to everybody that joined us in the chat and to watch. Hope that you learned something. Again, this has been Miles from Peak Performers in Disability in Central Texas.